Hello, my name is Jonathan Rupprecht, and today we're going to be talking about Part 137, Agricultural Aircraft Operations. So I'm an attorney who focuses only on drone law. I'm a commercial pilot and flight instructor. I've done and obtained numerous waivers for beyond line of sight, over people, swarming, over cars, drone light shows, all sorts of different things. We have over 400 plus spraying exemptions already approved, and I do a lot of this stuff all around the United States. So this is for educational purposes only. This is not legal advice. I am not your attorney. Do your own due diligence, and the law and the data, they're constantly changing. So Part 137, Agricultural Aircraft Operations. If you're flying under 55 pounds, you're going to be flying under Part 107. If you are 55 pounds and heavier, you're going to be flying under Part 91. Now, you might be asking, well, when does 137 come into play? 137 comes into play when you are dispensing economic poisons, or you're dispensing any other substance intended for plant nourishment, soil treatment, propagation of plant life, or pest control, or engaging in dispensing activities directly affecting agricultural, horticultural, or forest preservation, but not including the dispensing of live insects. Now, what is economic poisons? Economic poisons is defined as any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any insects, rodents, nematodes, fungi, weeds, and other forms of plant or animal life, or viruses, except for viruses on or in living man or other animals, which the Secretary of Agriculture shall declare to be a pest, and any substance or mixture of substances intended for use as a plant regulated, defoliant, or desiccant. What are not Part 137 agricultural aircraft operations? So if you're using a DJI Mavic 3 multispectral to get pictures of your crops and everything, that is not a Part 137 operation. You're just collecting data with a sensor passively, just monitoring. You're not actually dispensing anything. Using a drone to chase away birds, that's also not a 137 type of operation. And also dispensing of live bugs, that is not a 137 type of operation. So what do you need to have in order to fly as a Part 137 operator? If you are a civil aircraft operator, you're going to need a Part 137 operating certificate and an exemption from multiple burdensome regulations. You're also going to need to have one person as the chief supervisor. Each pilot will need a pilot certificate and endorsement from the chief supervisor. For 55-pound and heavier operations, the pilot is also going to have a third-class medical certificate because that's what the exemption requires. Each aircraft also needs to be registered. Now, what's the overall process look like in order to obtain a civil agricultural aircraft operating certificate? First, you file one or more petitions for exemption. 2, you obtain a remote pilot certificate and register at least one drone. 3, the exemption has to be approved. And then 4, you fill out 8710-3 form that requires you to put down aircraft registration, pilot certificate number. You email in that completed form, the granted exemption, also your third-class medical certificate, remote pilot certificate to the FAA. And then they're going to send back your operating certificate back via email. And that's the kind of overall view here. So what has happened recently? In May 2023, the FAA changed some things up. So they issued these two new types of exemptions, which really dramatically de-restricted basically a lot of people. The FAA went out and unilaterally updated a lot of everyone's exemptions. And then the FAA also got into the business of reviewing the manuals. They changed it up in regards to the in-person inspection. Before, we used to have to do in-person inspections at the local flight standards district office, but now once you have your exemption, you just file 8710-3 form and you get your operating certificate back. And what you do is you basically self-certify yourself that you're competent as a chief supervisor with the knowledge and skill to maintain the operation. So the FAA kind of got out of the business of really doing these in-person operation inspections. And that's really allowed people to really get into it. Before, it was much more problematic, and the downside now is it really allowed a lot more people to get into it. Some of the people who really aren't super competent, but the FAA kind of just doesn't want to deal with that anymore. So it is easier now to obtain an operating certificate. Then in February 2024, FAA issued the first exemption allowing 1 to 3 drones at a time. So you can swarm now, and you can also fly without a visual observer, and you can fly day or night. The FAA stopped granting the old style type of exemption, is only issuing the new type. Now, in May 2024, the FAA changed up the process again. The FAA won't grant you an exemption unless you have at least one drone registered and the chief supervisor has at least a remote pilot certificate. The FAA won't grant an operating certificate for a 55-pound and heavier drone unless your pilot also has their third-class medical. So those are kind of some unique points here that have recently popped up. So let's compare and contrast Part 107 type of operations versus Part 6191 type of operations. So for operations under Part 107, you're going to register your drone under Part 48, operate under Part 107, and then also comply with the terms and conditions of the exemption. Under Part 6191, you're going to comply with Part 43, 47 for registration, or Part 48 if you're under 55. And 6191 and the exemption terms and conditions. Also, the exemption comes with this thing called a blanket COA. You also comply with that. Regarding airspace, then airspace might be a problem under Part 107, but there is a capability of being able to fly quickly in those areas by obtaining a rapid authorization that is capable of being done under Part 107. For 55 pound and heavier, you get this thing called a blanket COA, which restricts you on how close you can get to these airports and seaports and glider ports. If you do need to fly near those, you'll just have to obtain another COA. Your blanket COA by default won't work, but it doesn't prohibit you from getting another one if you need to fly there. So it's not a deal breaker. You just need to go and obtain more paperwork. Regulatory variance method, under 107 you're using an exemption, and also 6191 you're using an exemption. For 107 you can register under Part 47 or Part 48. For Part 6191, you pretty much everybody registers under Part 47. Part 48 is only for people flying under 55 pounds under Part 6191. So that's kind of rare. That's typically what I see there is like the government operators that are trying to do public aircraft operations might do something like that. Now, if you're, who determines whether the aircraft is safe or not? The pilot determines if it's safe or not under Part 107. If it's an under 55 pound aircraft, for 6191 aircraft, the FAA has to basically either issue an airworthiness certificate, or the aircraft has to be determined under 44807 to do that. So that's not, you can't really do that. The FAA is going to have to do that. For the pilot certificate level, under 107, it's a remote pilot certificate, and for 6191, it's an exemption to use the remote pilot certificate or Part 61 certificate with an appropriate category and class. So regarding medical, under Part 107, 107.17 says the person has to basically, does the remote pilot know or have reason to know that he or she has a physical or mental condition that would interfere with the safe operation? Under 61, the exemption basically requires third class medical, and that's the medical standard. And under 107, you get an exemption from multiple provisions under 137 as well as 107.36. And under 6191, there's a really high chance you're going to need an exemption to comply when you're 55 pounds and heavier, to comply with everything, with 137 especially. Do you need a visual observer? It depends on the operation. The vast majority of the time it's a no. And also under 6191, with the newer style type of exemptions coming out, they don't require a visual observer, but there might be certain other exotic type of operations that might require it, depending upon if you're doing something very exotic. But 99% of the time, it's pretty much no. So let's compare and contrast 107 versus 6191 ops. The exemption. So the exemptions last 24 months. They're free to obtain under 107 or Part 91. They're both free. If you do a waiver, they last typically 24 to 48 months. They're free to file and obtain for under 107 or 91. If you're going to do a 44807 to try to get the aircraft determined so you can fly it, the duration of that lasts as long as 44807 is good. Duration of airworthiness certificates, if you went that route, would be dependent upon the type of airworthiness certificate, though it's all over the place. Regarding 107, you wouldn't need a 44807 or airworthiness certificate, because 107, basically the pilot determines that, not the FAA. But when you're in a Part 91, then you're going to have that aircraft determined pretty much most of the time. That's pretty much what everybody's doing, is they're using aircraft that are already determined under 44807. And the FAA has this list of agricultural aircraft that have these 44807 determinations that you should pretty much buy from. It's a good starting point of when you're trying to shop for an aircraft, and the FAA's already determined that, along with kind of the overall set of operating restrictions, and therefore because of that, you don't need an airworthiness certificate. Registration. So under Part 107, the registration, you would operate under Part 48 for registration. It lasts about 36 months. If you're doing Part 47, it lasts about 84 months. It costs $5. Part 91, you're only allowed to do Part 47 type of operations, because it's 55 pound and heavier. There is this weird exception where if you are a small unmanned aircraft, so you're under 55 and you're a government operator operating in Part 91, you could do Part 48 and do $5 registration. But for the vast majority of everybody that's not a government operator and you're 55 and heavier, you're just doing Part 47 for registration. Your pilot certificate, it's indefinite. and that's for 107 and also for Part 91. For the currency, however, the currency is the primary kicker there that you have to be paying attention to. So for 107 pilots as well as Part 61 pilots operating in a Part 91, they would have to maintain their aeronautical currency every 24 months. So as you do kind of consider things with exemptions, under 55 pounds, those exemptions are aircraft agnostic, so you can throw different aircraft on there. There's no 44807 determination going on. If you are flying a drone that's 55 pound and heavier, you're going to have to buy something or operate something only if it's on this agricultural aircraft list of all the aircraft that have a 44807 determination. So additionally, if you're wanting to change the restrictions on an exemption, it's going to take a while. If you're using already an exemption with a set of restrictions that is pretty much previously approved, turnaround time right now, you're looking at something around 180 calendar days. If that set of restrictions has never been approved before, you're looking at about a year to a year and a half turnaround time. For aircraft that have been previously approved before under 44807, well, under 55 pounds, you don't have to worry about that because you as a pilot determine it. But if you're flying 55 and heavier, if it's on that list, you're good to go. You don't need to do anything further. And the FAA is constantly updating that list as newer aircraft are coming out. If that aircraft has not been previously determined under 44807, it'll take about almost a year to year and a half to do that. The fastest I've ever seen that done was in about 8 months. So here's some frequently asked questions. And while you're here, I have a newsletter at the top if you guys want to sign up for it. I'm sending out articles all the time. And if you want to learn more about drone spraying, I have a 20,000 word article on just drone spraying at the bottom right there. If you want to really learn a lot more than what we're talking about here. So FAQs, do I need an aircraft to start the process? You do not need an aircraft to start the process. However, you're not going to get an exemption unless your aircraft is registered and you have a remote pilot certificate. So you could start the paperwork process right now. However, you better have that drone pretty quickly and registering pretty quickly in order to have it all ready by the time the FAA is getting to your application, your petition, and actually processing it. So can you add exemptions in aircraft later? So for the exemptions, yes, you can add on multiple exemptions later on. You're not limited to what you have right now. For aircraft, for 55 pound and heavier, the FAA is constantly automatically updating everything to that list. So you really don't have to do anything, kind of just like auto updates. For under 55 pounds, it's anything that's determined by you. You don't have to actually list it out for under 55 pounds. So you can buy future aircraft later on and just start doing that. And it looks like I double dipped here with the same question, so I'll just skip down to 4. Do I have to have all this stuff if I'm spraying on my phone farm in my own benefit? Yes. Basically, the FAA views it as if your drone's flying 1 inch above the blade of grass. Yes, you're in their turf, and that you have to comply and go through all this rigmarole. So question 5, can I swarm for 55 pounds and heavier? Yes, under the exemptions, you can swarm 1 to 3 drones with the newer style exemption. For under 55 pounds, your drone has to obtain, your operation has to obtain a 10735 waiver, and I've done those before. If you need help, let me know. For 6, can I fly a drone beyond line of sight? Yes, depending upon how it's approved. For 55 pound and heavier, there's only been like 2 of those ever approved for 55 and heavier. For under 55 pounds, there's been numerous ones approved under 55 for beyond line of sight, but I don't know of any 137 beyond line of sight type of flying. Can you fly at night? Under 55 pounds, yes. 55 pounds and heavier, the newer style exemptions do allow that. Do you need a Part 61 Airman certificate for flying a 55 pound and heavier drone? No, you don't. You can use a 107 remote pilot certificate as a minimum now. Question 9, I want to fly under someone else's operating certificate and exemption. What are the problems with this? There's multiple problems with that. I mean, one, it depends on how good their onboarding is. If somebody else does something stupid and it causes a problem where the overall operating certificate is pulled, everybody's grounded. That causes all sorts of potential issues for you if you entered into contracts, because now you're going to be in breach of contract for not being able to deliver because you got grounded. Additionally, 137 requires you to keep a list of everywhere you're flying, which means if they're the operator, you're required to notify them everywhere you're spraying, what you're doing, and everything. So once they have that information, they know exactly where your customers are, and then if you ever leave them, they can start poaching all of your customers. So if you do sign some type of non-compete, non-solicitation agreement with them, you definitely want to make sure that it goes both ways, that they can't solicit or go after your guys after you just basically told them exactly where everyone's at and how much they're spraying, what they're spraying there. Question number 10, what should I know when purchasing a 55-pound and heavier aircraft? Find clients with cash nearby, figure out what chemicals they need to spray, read those chemical labels, and find out what the drone can comply with those chemical labels, because some of the drones out there cannot presently comply with chemical labels. That's a really important point, just due to their orientation, or they can't spray the droplets fine enough. There's certain kind of issues you'll see as especially with also the nozzles being too far out past the tips of the props and stuff like that. For 55-pound and heavier drones, make sure that the aircraft is on the list of approved aircraft. FAQ 12. What should I know regarding state pesticide licensing? So state laws requiring they have like actual specific pesticide license requirements. So what we've been talking about briefly is the federal laws, and once you get that done federally, you're good to go everywhere. But the states have laws regarding restricted use pesticides. They're all different. Sometimes one state will have reciprocity with the other, but you're ultimately gonna have to look at a state-by-state basis. And when you're doing this, also make sure that the states are also comfortable with doing certain types of operations such as swarming or beyond line of sight. There are some places that I have heard of where there have been problems with doing swarming because of how the local state laws were written, so that the feds were okay with it, but the state laws were having problems with it. So if anybody has any questions, please email me at john@jrupprechtlaw.com.